Bam.
This is John Spencer, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
Man, you get around. I just got back again from Israel.
I did just come back from Israel again, which just followed a trip to Australia. So
Yeah.
I'm moving around a lot.
You just published this piece on tunnels, and it's fascinating how much war is moving and how fast is it all going forward? I mean, tunnels seem to me like maybe we're going back in time, but with better techniques. What direction is combat going?
I mean, the subterranean, as you know, Pete, that I study as well as urban warfare, it's always been there, but how much does it play a role? And depending on what the objectives of a war are, how much does the underground work? I wrote a piece at the beginning of this war when after October 7th, Israel declared war on Hamas, but Hamas had built a whole world for war. A lot of uniqueness there. And they're subterranean, although they're not the only ones that have tunnels around the world. North Korea has tunnels, China has tunnels, Hezbollah had tunnels. These were very unique in the density of them, the 300 to 400 miles in an area that's only 25 miles long by 5 to 7 miles wide, but they actually had spent over $1 billion by my estimates now investing in this underground world for the sole purpose of war. Because a lot of people also have a lot of tunnels like Seoul and other places that are, civilian underground everything.
Yeah.
What Israel faced in the Hamas tunnels was very unique, but going underground as our weapons evolve, in my wording, all warfare is asymmetric. Right. Each side is trying to compete against the other side's strength. So, of course, as militaries advance, weapons get better. It drives people into urban areas, drives people underground, where you can move and escape all this pervasive intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, all the drones in the sky, all the big bombs. Going underground is not new, but there are some definite nuances here that what Hamas built was very unique.
When we've talked in the past, you've also talked about the super terrestrial, where you're 40 floors up potentially in a fight, and that as well. Is any of that playing into either of these, the Ukraine or the Israeli wars?
I wouldn't say it hasn't played. There has been some high elevation super surface aspects. I mean, super surface can be anything from a high rise building, anything over, let's say 8 stories tall, but also the rooftops and all of that. But I used to face this as a kind of an advisor. Everybody would look at, they'd go to New York City and go, well, how do you clear that skyscraper? Like, why are you clearing a skyscraper? If the enemy puts himself in it, they're very vulnerable, as in they're right. Contained. Yeah, they have elevation. So there's also, in warfare, the church clock tower, where the sniper is. Absolutely, that's playing a role in Gaza and other places. And in the Ukraine, you get to those higher levels of elevation. But that, that urban aspect of having a high rise and it being this great obstacle, no. Not saying there hasn't been, both in Ukraine and Gaza, very tall buildings that have played into effect in the battles. Absolutely. But on the dark side, where people try to use it as this great challenge, how do you clear a high rise, it's 60 stories tall with hundreds of rooms? Well, you don't. You just, there's no need to. Even with
siege it.
Yeah, siege, or even in terrorism, counterterrorism tactics. If there's an active shooter at a certain level, how do you get to him? And there's all kinds of lessons we learn, but context. We're talking about high intensity urban warfare against a contested defending enemy. He knows you're there. You're not surprising him. And if he puts himself in a high rise, good for him. Now he's good for you, because now he's vulnerable. The sniper threat, though, I will give you. And when I was in Gaza in July, it was a huge threat. Both the sniper and our old friend, the IEDs, are popping back up as this, asymmetric guerrilla threat that is really hard to completely get rid of.
I know from my time on patrols, we had a sniper. In this one instance, we had a sniper hunting us. Shot the same dude twice, one time in the butt. And So we had to do all the counter sniper stuff. We were doing our lazy W's. We were arranging our MRAPs in a way to try to contain any, and the pre-briefs were all about elevated positions. It became really hard for that dude just by using counter sniper things, right? Like you don't have to use them every day because that would make your mission harder. But once you know there's a sniper in the area, you just act differently. And if he was to pop his head up, everybody is looking for that, and it's going to be really bad for them. Like people think that snipers are magical, but if we determine, and someone always sees these things, right? It becomes really hard to work even out of a big tower. And I'm thinking about the Vegas shootings. That guy is active. It's a horror going down below, but his time of action was relatively short in terms of response, knocking down a door, and he's no longer a problem.
Yeah, I mean, it was like 60 seconds. There was a security person at his door. That's
Right.
phenomenal, and that's what you want. You think about like the University of Texas shooter, things. There are other worst case scenarios when you don't have that response, and that bleeds counterterrorism to warfare. Agree with you. And the snipers, even in my time, saying Baghdad, where snipers were taking shots through necks or through armpits.
Mm-hmm.
They can be a challenge, but there are solutions in tactics and technologies. Even now today, we can pick up a shot, know where it came from, in distance, direction, and everything that are helping. But as somebody who also does that kind of red teaming or even helping defenders, I mean, the urban sniper is an enduring challenge just because of the complexity of the terrain and how many places they can hide. I mean, there are remote, even in Syria, in the early 2000s, there were remote controlled sniper rifles being controlled from, web cafes in another country.
Yeah.
So they're a high threat, low cost, high impact psychological weapon that can be used. And if the military is not prepared for them, and then they can be found wanting.
Yeah. For sure, when you have something like that, you get several echelons above your unit's attention. What do these guys need to go out and operate? Because no one's going to stop us with one guy. And here's the thing I've learned from beginning all my patrols. If a Kiowa or an Apache is on station, nobody who's against us is sticking their head up. They don't want any part of that fight if you have that kind of a tool. But if you don't have that tool, there is still just the countermeasures that do. Right around the time when we were being hunted by that sniper was when the DZ sniper was doing, their stuff. And I happened to be in DC in between, doing things over in Iraq. And so I'm at the gas station doing lazy W's and trying to be around the pole, and making myself as unappealing as a target as possible. So I don't want to get too caught down on that because there's a lot more stuff to talk about. But let's get back into the tunnels. Let's get back underground. What have the Israelis learned about countering these long-term strategic tunnels? Like the plans to use these things it's robust.
They've learned a lot. And what I wrote in the article is, as I visited, I just got back from my fourth trip, really asked them that deep question about how are they dealing with the tunnels. They're the most prepared military, to be honest, in the world. And that's not opinion, that's fact. They had the only military that had a full brigade level unit of the Special Forces engineers, Yahalom, version of weasels, kind of like our tunnel rats of Vietnam that we did away with. But they have been training for decades for urban warfare, and they were just by capacity not prepared for Israel's fight for the tunnels, the presence of hostages in tunnels, just the scale of them. They found over 6,000 tunnel shafts, and as you learn, there's also shafts that aren't tunnels, well shafts, and all these things that became a real big problem. But culturally, as you and I have talked in the past, militaries have cultures, and they have cultures which direct how they think about things, how they either have specialties for or even approach. And Israel had a culture of underground warfare, of also, avoid and bypass, don't enter it unless you have to. And because of the context of Gaza, where the mission is to seize the enemy's center of gravity, seize his terrain, seize his weapon supplies, it required you to do what you don't want to do, which is interact with the tunnels. From when they first interacted with the tunnels from November of 2023 till now, they've completely transformed themselves. They had to push that level of just understanding of tunnels from the special groups, which relates to a lot of topics we talk about, down to the general foot soldier, ability to identify a tunnel, to secure it, to watch out for the booby traps, to be able to do initial assessments of the tunnels before specialty comes in. But then Israel also faced, okay, we found thousands of tunnels. What do we do? Our mission is to degrade Hamas's military capability, which includes their infrastructure. So they really faced the challenge of how do you destroy a tunnel? And I
Right.
had, I'd also studied that, and they actually brought in 5 industrial level pumps that could fill an Olympic swimming pool in 7 minutes. Just
Wow.
these massive pumps. And they brought massive tubes that went into the ocean, but also they did some also freshwater stuff. And they tried to flood the tunnels just to flush the enemy out of. They were having,
Wow.
like urban warfare history, they were having weeks-long battles for a city block and not making much movement because the enemy had this complete network of underground facilities to pop in and out of. So they tried flooding them and it did not work, which is a lesson for
No.
urban warfare and underground warfare history, is that it's, in this case, it wasn't a feasible option because it took 2 weeks to fill just a small tunnel network to where it rose to the surface, and it did push fighters out of the surface, but the water just drained back out because these are concrete tubes that aren't tubes. They have openings and stuff. So the water just seeped out, or they had drainage in them, but they still face like how do you destroy a tunnel? In the north, in Hezbollah tunnels, they had found previously they had used wet cement. So just brought, like we see in our communities, just truck after truck and fill it with wet cement. That's also temporary. Really, the only way you can destroy a tunnel is through explosives. So if you have 450 miles of tunnels, Israel faced a strategic resource problem. Like there's not enough explosives in the world. Well, there is, but there's not enough
Yeah.
explosives to do this. And you have to line you can't just, like a bunker buster will destroy a portion of a tunnel, but it doesn't destroy a tunnel shaft, or its whole thing. And they found tunnels 2 miles long, 1 mile long. You could enter northern Gaza and come out in Rafah or southern Gaza, essentially because of this Swiss cheese underground city that's there. So they had to fix that problem, and they basically turned to stringing together anti-tank mines along the shafts of tunnels, but also having to prioritize tunnels. In the West, we believe that, look, Israel has only destroyed 10% of the Hamas tunnels. I started seeing that being reported, like they have to get to 100% of Hamas tunnels to have a success. Israel started to classify the tunnels as like, okay, these are strategic tunnels, like these cross-border tunnels between Egypt and Gaza. That was the lifeline for Hamas's weapons supply. Those are strategic capabilities. Israel had to basically create this hierarchy. Like every tunnel that connects a house to a house is a tactical tunnel. They'll never be able to destroy all those. And if they did, it would destroy every living area because that's how pervasive the tunnels are in Gaza.
Wow. Yeah.
Lastly, though, Pete, which is from a military, and I'm sure Israel started to really fight against the enemy's defending capability, that the tunnels gave them the ability to control the initiative, to control the momentum of the forces. Because every tunnel you found, you had to stop for, you had to deal with it. The commanders in the IDF started to try to rethink that. And then I explained in the article, through a lot of intelligence capabilities and other systems, they developed a way not only to know where the tunnel entrances that they wanted to enter were, but also to develop the capability to enter the tunnel before the enemy knew that they were there. Because they discovered in the north that any tunnel they found was empty. By the time they found it, Hamas actually built the bombs inside of the tunnel walls. They didn't put booby traps in. They literally poured the cement in many places, and the bombs would be there. And they'd have a Wi-Fi camera that could look and activate the bomb when they weren't there, when they saw somebody in it. They always found a tunnel that Hamas was not using anymore. By the time they get to Khan Yunis, they basically completely changed their mindset that tunnel isn't an obstacle. It's a asset if you know how to use it. And they were conducting simultaneous maneuvers, truly maneuver warfare, by entering the tunnels in multiple spots, not just one spot. At the same time, they were attacking Hamas on the surface. So from my understanding, especially in modern warfare, but we could argue how far back, the first military to maneuver against an enemy simultaneously underground and on the surface, doing combined joint maneuver warfare against an enemy, but on two different planes like that. And they also using an air asset, but to have the risk tolerance, which took a
Yeah.
while to enter the enemy's tunnel, but also they had to control both maneuvering forces at the same time. For me, it's a transformation because they changed their culture, which you and I know is really hard to do, especially in the U.S. military. They
Yeah.
changed their culture to when they went to Hezbollah, against Hezbollah in the north. Those tunnels were also viewed as a potential asset to destroy the enemy.
Wow. There's a lot in all that you just talked about. I mean, you could look. We know these guys. You could talk to the engineers who went through West Point and are brilliant engineers, and they all have different ideas on what's possible, what's not, what's a waste, what's efficient. But um, I want to talk to you about the role of the EWO. But by the way, there's a question down below. So the lazy W, this is Pete's interpretation of it, is you're just making making yourself a two-dimensional W shape, and you're just kind of just back and forth, back and this. And I'm mimicking what it looks like, but you're moving your feet side to side. Maybe you're making your stance up to 4 feet wide and maybe 2 feet deep, and you're just back and forth, kind of just weaving in a random pattern, so that when the sniper's trying to lock on you, they have to lock on to something that's trying to randomize itself. That's probably the best way I can explain it. How did I do, John? Is that all right?
Not bad. I mean, it applies. It's kind of a term we give to basically any counter sniper movement activities you're doing to, like you said, to include how you position your vehicles. You're not just standing in one place for a long time, even if you're on guard. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But yeah, pretty close.
So the EWO, I mean, if you have wireless, is that command detonate? How do you characterize a explosive that's buried into a wall that's triggered at least by a camera? If something is that command detonated remotely, and then what's the EWO's role in there? Is there a dude going into the tunnel with a backpack, interdicting any kind of signal?
So, I only do unclassified research.
Yeah.
They're using the full breadth of even electronic, but a lot of those are, I mean, the infrastructure in these things. And I was in that tunnel. I don't know if we talked when I was in the tunnel, the Hamas tunnel in December that I was in, was that it was one of the biggest ones they found, but it had, communications wires, lighting, power, air conditioning,
Right.
fans, air ventilation, like the amount of infrastructure. So many of those would have been hardwired, which is really, as you know, hard to interdict.
Yeah.
And this is they prepared for over 20 years. And I found that really hard to convince people. Like I can tell you about all these different urban warfare scenarios, but when an enemy has had 20 years to
Yeah.
get ready for war and built, I used to say that, a lot of these, the schools and the mosque and the hospitals, that Hamas built the tunnels underneath all of them. In places like Khan Yunis, no, they built the tunnel and the infrastructure first, and then put
Wow.
a school on top of it as part of their human shield strategy.
Yeah, that's crazy. So, in general, from my end of the work, counterintelligence wise, even in the U.S. military, there is rules for shielding on the kind of cable it is, and this is decades and decades old stuff. So, a line that carries, say, TS can't be near a line that carries unclassified. You've got 20 years to build I mean, you could do any kind of pre-countermeasure what an electric warfare officer might put together, because you have a lot of time to just constantly upgrade and change. It's amazing.
Yeah, actually, I just got back too I spoke at a lessons learned conference that the IDF was doing, and they had DOMEX. What they have been required to develop, even on, in exploitation of documents, maps, puzzles, even the fact that, which I didn't know, that there's even the limits of AI to help you in document exploitation, that there is no OCR really for Arabic, let alone the variation that is in different areas. There's no electronic means of even where people think that would be easy. No. And what the IDF, which they have that, it's a nation at war, so they can gather resources. So even like their exploitation teams that are doing that, they grew them rapidly to be able to handle the flood, which is something that, I learn every time I go, even from October 7th. It would impress both you it impressed me, but I think it would impress you too. Just the level
Yeah.
of document planning that the Hamas had done for their attacks. They had ConOps with them. They had the ability to take, which I almost want to write an article about selfies kill. They had an immense amount of intelligence that they had gathered from soldiers' selfies, and then pieced those together to create vivid, like 3-dimensional intelligence pictures of sites in Israel that were like surprising even to Israel. This is that level of speed of information that we're dealing with.
Yeah.
Israel has definitely dealt with it, but that fact that there's not even an OCR that deals with Arabic that could rapidly help you with exploitation was a surprise to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I hadn't even thought about that. Gosh, it's crazy. So let's go back to the engineer side. When the engineers started this, it was pump water, pump foam, whatever it was going to be. When did they start to look away from some of these traditional things? You talked a little bit about the water pumping, but there's other countermeasures too. So I guess how fast did that evolution go from looking at it as like a danger thing to potentially an asset if we covered it differently?
So I wrote about one vignette, which I do believe, leadership, as you know, plays a big part. And one of the leaders that I started interviewing and who actually took me into Gaza, took me to Khan Yunis, was this General Goldfuss that I talk about in the article, who was basically a former Navy SEAL, their version of Navy SEALs, that they made a division commander. So he thinks a lot different, just to be honest. From talking Boyd's OODA loop to centers of gravity, like he took, I think, Khan Yunis in like December, and by February so within 2 months he had not only assigned it as a priority, where he, as a division commander, was going into Gaza and getting into the tunnels of Hamas, because he viewed it as a very high priority to take that away from the enemy. And within 2 months, he had convinced the leadership. So he had to convince his leader that it was willing to take the risk to do this. So that evolution from obstacle to capability was really 2 to 3 months.
Right. Wow, that's fast. Or
Yeah.
is that fast? Is it
No,
fast? I don't know.
that's fast. That's really fast.
That seemed fast to me. I mean, especially when, look, we all know that we're kind of bound by doctrine a lot of times.
Yes.
And if you want to get away from doctrine, then you have to know the doctrine, and you have to be someone pretty close to in charge. Otherwise, it creates a lot of problems, and it'll turn you into a pariah. Everybody loves a maverick until they don't like their idea. And then all of a sudden your maverick pariah are the same person.
Yeah, and that could have gone. That's the risk tolerance, right? So,
Right.
Necessity is the mother of all innovation, but our risk tolerance is also oftentimes very low.
Sure.
And in a war, sometimes it has to be reassessed.
Yeah. There's still a lot of critique of the Israeli forces for the way they're prosecuting this war. I know you've been on the record of saying it's, for any nation, it's the most restraint that we've ever seen. But there is just a lot of reporting that goes in the other direction. How do we balance this?
Well, I think one of the ways to balance, Pete, is that I go there, right? So if it's somebody who hasn't been there, whether it's a reporter, and there's been a couple, like this is the idea that Israel has kept international media out of the war. That's not true. People like Trey Yangst and a few others who have said, I'm going to stay here, I'm going to go in, and I'm going to see as much as I can. So I think one of the ways is just to fight it with on the ground. And we've talked in the past how we don't have combat observers. So, in the kind of media and social media world of just a bunch of useful idiots. But when you have basically nations making decisions based on misinformation, that's what's concerning to me, because did those nations, those political bodies, send their own observer, whoever it was, whether it's I don't care who it is, that is informing them, or are they just going off of this kind of collective collective assessment of, look, I see the pictures. Clearly it's bad. Look, I see the number that Hamas gives us. Clearly it's bad. One of the ways to fight against it is to start at the top, or you can start at the bottom. I would recommend that they start at the top and develop a capability to have a intimate understanding, but not by just flying in and out, of actually observing the operation aspects. I had a small role in, like, you're criticizing Israel based on what framework of understanding of what's the realm of possible. We all agree that, after October 7th, the invasion of Israel, they had the right to start, to do a defensive war against Hamas, remove them from power. That's a framework everybody understands. Okay, now
Right.
you have an enemy that's defending urban terrain. What's the framework that's ever been used before? What are the realm of possible? Oh, by the way, you have American hostages. Like, what's the realm of even hostage recovery quickly here? Geopolitical constraints, concerns. I've been really concerned about just a kind of collective group think based on people's ideals about what is the realm of possible or what's actually happening on the ground. Like
Right.
the ideal, which has been really the weaponization of these organizations like the United Nations. No, he said this. This guy made this statement. I'm going to use that against you in a global court. Like, that's, we all have our fools, right? So,
Right.
but what are they doing on the ground? What's the overwhelming evidence of the soldiers and the nation in the operation? How do you fight it? I've tried a little bit with, like, well, you want to do comparative analysis? Do you want to do your statistics? Do you want to do actual going there and watching them physically with your own eyes, not listening to what they say, just watching what they're
Yeah.
doing? Like you and I would understand, right? I view the war differently because I've been in other wars. So if
Right.
I see a commander constraining himself, I'm going to say, look, he's constraining himself more than we did in whatever situation. And we can talk about which vignette you want to use, or even the realm of possible with the civilians, right? So and just in this war, you can see the vast difference of the civilian population in Gaza versus southern Lebanon. I mean,
Mm.
there's no reported daily number of civilian casualties in Lebanon because they were able to get out of harm's way. They heeded the call to evacuations and quickly were able to. The one thing on the Gaza is, what's the realm of possible here of where Egypt won't let a single person out of the Rafah border between Egypt and Gaza into the Sinai desert to create. There's so much stuff here that is misrepresented as what's the realm of possible, let alone what the IDF is doing. Because I could insert us, U.S. military, or any other military, and go, based on their history, I could tell you how they would approach this. It would be different, but would it be less destructive, less civilian harm? There's no history saying that.
Yeah. Man. Yeah. And how much culpability does Egypt hold? Right. All the protesters that they mad at them because, heck, a lot of other places take refugees all the time, especially if it's this. You and I both know the Sinai and plenty of room to put it. Look, they can go to the encampment out there and just live there in some of those high rises, and for now, be at least away from harm and not near anything else they could harm themselves. It's
I mean,
easily. I would say it's easy.
Pete, you probably noticed, but most people don't, that Rafah city actually was on both sides of the Egypt-Gaza border. Egypt, when you basically erased their side, 50,000
Right.
Gazans on their side, that they came in and said, you can no longer live here. I don't care where you go, just go away. And there wasn't a global protest over that. But
Right.
people studying the maps is what I've heard. I've been there. Like, you wouldn't have to even have to be established as a refugee, but a displaced persons camp, which is something very, very historical in almost every battle, but create a place outside of the combat area. But Hamas has benefited from the fact that Egypt won't let there be a displaced person just on the other side of the gate, literally like 500 meters on the other side of the gate, create this massive camp where the NGOs would be safe in going there, where supplies could go without being stolen. It would have changed this entire war, and nobody barely even mentions Egypt in the war. It's all on Israel.
Yeah, and then you get into it's so hard to figure out when the politics start and when the actual conflict ends. And you could look at our politics as an example. A lot of people in our side of the equation hate Benjamin Netanyahu, and yet he's been the prime minister. And we've talked about this most of the last 30 years. He continues to get elected, whether our political left likes him or not. So you have the problem of trying to counter that. And then maybe you can help me historically when we look at the political versus the combat side of this thing. Is there another conflict where we're seeking a ceasefire and not capitulation from a terrorist force? I mean, we have to give a lot of grace to the Gazans to call them a country, because we don't see that. Most of the international community doesn't see that. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on how we separate politics out from, the combat side of things?
Well, as a somebody who used to teach strategy at West Point, that there's if you ever try to separate the two, then it's not going to go well for you, because there's always, war is a
Yeah.
contest of will pursuing political goals, or context politically,
Mm,
which has
right.
been really an understanding. Like, look, Gaza could have ended months and months and months ago, but that's not the context, which is, I mean, Israel could have used all of its resources to rapidly dismantle Hamas, remove them from power so they have no hope that they're going to win, to conduct a much larger operation, which actually would reduce the protracted, destructive block by block aspect to it. Trying to find out where the combat starts and the politics stop is impossible. This
Yeah.
is same thing in yeah, October 7th, Hamas attacks. October 8th, Hezbollah attacks. Even within this war, a lot of people thought that Israel should deal with Hezbollah first, while Hamas was contained. But that leaves, again, the politics. War is human. Your hostages left in the hands of this terrorist organization. I
Right.
agree with you on the saying that Israel should just cease fire now means that Israel should allow Hamas a victory in their attack, and it would continue the cycle of violence, right? This
Right.
is, there's a lot of fallacies in what we know, what we've lived through, versus actual war against somebody who isn't an irrational actor. Hamas is not a rational actor. Yes, it wants to survive. That's the rational part, but it also isn't rational in what it wants for its population, for its
Mm,
goals. It's not rational. So what you do politically to defeat that is going to be very complex. And unlike a situation where there is a rational actor who actually cares about his survival and maybe cares about his own population.
right. We've also, gosh, let me go back real quick with the whole politics versus combat thing.
Yeah.
Is it common to expect? I mean, I know we have basically a ceasefire in Korea that's lasted a long time, but is there anywhere else where we would force that as an external force? Granted, we're the U.S., but that seems to be our goal, and the end of the conflict, which I think we all want. But we wouldn't take that deal. We wouldn't take ceasefire, and I wouldn't expect another country to do that also, because, like you said, Hamas has shown a willingness to come back again and again and again. They've woven their society into their war machine. How much more of that do we need to deal with? And I don't know how you do it with less damage than what they've already done.
I had some ideals, but that wasn't the world that Israel lived in, where you use more combat power, move with more speed, use your
Right.
allies to encourage Egypt to be a help and not a hindrance. But so I have an article coming out tonight, actually, in Wall Street
Oh,
Journal,
nice.
which talks about these fallacies, right? These fallacies that all wars end in negotiation. No, that's not true. Wars don't end in negotiations when both sides haven't had their interest, haven't been defeated. Basically, that we're all going to agree. And like you said, the armistice between North and South Korea, even within that uniqueness of the why and how and the fears of escalation, and this is the ideal that we all don't want any world war in the world. I
Right.
agree.
Yeah.
I agree. There are people who have their own interest in what they believe in: power, conquest, all these that require wars of defense. That's really the only, in our new global international order, the reason we say is just to go to war is to defend
Right.
yourself. Uh,
Yeah.
it's so problematic. Yes, there are other contexts where other militaries, like which is Israel's history. Israel has a history of being told, "Hey, you need to call that a win and just stop," even though
Right.
um, it, it's historical, but they live in a very unique political context of where they are in the world. There are other situations. Again, this is going back to, would this happen to us? No, Would we
Oh,
respond differently to an October 7th attack on our borders? Absolutely. I can say with strong confidence. And I don't know since we talked, but General Milley, who was the Joint Chief for two presidents, who said, like, what are you crazy? We would have responded to this with extreme force and
right.
massive combat power.
Yeah,
Even the rockets, there were 4,000 rockets launched in the opening hours of October 7th and about 12,000 more since then. We would
yeah,
have put air power in the sky until not a single bomb was emanating out of enemy territory.
that's
Yes,
right.
these are just common sense things, but you have all these uninformed people who believe they don't even know the facts of even the region, let alone the context of the two
Yeah,
combatants that impose their values on them. And that gets really, for me, like, okay, fine, your parents did you wrong in your ability to critically think about things and who you think the oppressed is and the fact that you need identity. Look, but when it reaches national level, where you have governments deciding to embargo Israel, deciding to criticize Israel's actions, that is really problematic for the future of their nations. When you
right.
play politics and you're going to cause more harm is really the history of this. When you go
Mhm.
down this political, uninformed aspect of war.
Yeah. Boy, you're talking a lot. That all makes a lot of sense. One of the ways that Israel has continued with its emerging Arab partners to stabilize that region is through business. And like, if you want to go innovate some kind of machine or technology or software, well, you can pick worse places than Israel. And a lot of the Arab states are realizing that Israel is a better business partner than they are a combat enemy. It's a whole lot more cost efficient to go make a bunch of money with those guys than to try to keep up with them militarily.
Absolutely. 100%. I
Yeah.
mean, the economic power, their GDP and their innovations and their Peace Prize and their patents. It's like, these are just facts. Very,
Yeah.
very, there's four forms of national power: diplomatic, information, military, and economic. We like to talk the military aspect and what Iran built, what the Islamic regime in Iran built around Israel, this ring of fire, was impressive militarily. And the fact that it was allowed, that billions of dollars financed it, like, hopefully the lessons have been learned. But you can't deny the facts on Israel's strength in economic innovation, contributions to sciences, medical. I mean, from even the combat medical, I think it would impress you what Israel has done to take the injured to death ratio and broken the bell curve, because they're using things like freeze dried plasma, warm blood,
Crazy.
which is really hard to do. They bring ICU beds to the injury now. So they converted like tracks into ICU beds, not like triage beds, ICU beds with a physician in it, and they'll bring it to the injury. Their advancements, again, you can have your opinions
Yeah.
about governments and about Netanyahu and about you cannot deny the facts of what Israel is able to do as a nation in all fields of even sciences.
Okay. Right. Even just for example, the Israeli bandage. And again, I'm not allowed to call it that, but that's what it's
No,
called.
we called it that for years, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't even know what the new name is. I just know I'm not going to say it. I'm going to say, like, that's the Israeli bandage. And if
Yep.
it's going to save me or my friend, guess what? Don't care who made it. I want it to save my friend. And that thing is amazing.
Or that active protection system that's on the Abrams tank now. Like, where did that
Yeah,
come from? Where did
yeah,
um, I mean, even you and I deal a lot with military theory. Like, after the Yom
yeah,
Kippur War, the U.S. military did 27 massive studies. I'm like, how did you do it? How did you survive when you shouldn't have survived? It changed the elements of U.S. military leadership training, air land battle, the Big Five. It's coming out of Israel's creativity, innovation, military tactics that are, and we've seen it again. What they did to Hezbollah in a matter of 2 weeks, 2 weeks, Pete, it
yeah,
will go down in history as one of the most impressive dismantling campaigns of this. It wasn't a nation, right? But it was a terror army within a nation with the nation, arguably. But what they did with the pager operation, with the leadership dismantling, with even entering southern Lebanon with very low casualties, but very precise, targeted, discriminate operations, and dismantled this massive military that everybody said, which you should be called on what your advice or your predictions were. Everybody said Israel couldn't do it. They'd face a huge price. Haifa and Tel Aviv would be burning if they went to war against Hezbollah, and it didn't happen.
When I think about, my side, like that operation to sell walkie-talkies and pagers to these guys, and I mean, I know how this works. You make that contact, and you're like, I think I can sell these guys these things, and then you think far enough. I mean, talk about strategic. This is a long-term, slow burn thing. And you might show some of your capability on the intercept side with phones by saying, I know your guys' phones are compromised. You cannot use phones. And then you show them
anything because their walkie-talkies blew up, their pages blew up.
Well, I mean, before the pages and the walkie-talkies, to sell them on that idea, you reveal a little bit of that. And it's a brilliant operation. Some Mossad guy got a purchase order from the enemy to buy all of these things that they may turn around and provision. That is an amazing thing. And if there's that, what else is there in their prep system? When they're looking at these things, it is that Hezbollah, because you recall they were just like, there's no way they can fight a 2-front war. Plus, there's Iran, and not only have they done that, they've done the best job you could possibly come up with. I mean, I don't know if there's a better scenario.
No, and this is, which is again the irrationality of it. In our world, the social media world, there's some people believing that Hezbollah won something, and Hezbollah fighters were like waving flags, like what did you win? Like every reasonable metric of your capabilities, your leadership, your whatever, your deterrence, your fear invoking, like it's all gone. There's still tens of thousands of them, but it's undeniable what Israel did and how they did it so impressively. And so here's the uninformed bit that I get is, well, if they could do it for Hezbollah, why couldn't they do it for Hamas? And they did this on purpose then. Like that's how uninformed kind of conversations that I get involved in. Like, well, the actual operation to return the hostages, remove this power. You can't remove Hezbollah from Lebanon. It's interwoven into the society. And Israel's not going to invade Beirut and take over Lebanon. But it degraded Hamas's capabilities and set it back decades. In Hamas, the intelligence is not there. The capabilities, like it's such a vastly different context. But this is where uninformed people want to compare. Well, look at the destruction. So they did that on purpose. No, actually, like it's so crazy sometimes. But that reaches national levels, and then you have national elected officials repeating this insanity.
Yeah. So when you were there, you must have heard a little bit about thoughts on President Trump getting elected again.
A little bit, yeah. There's definitely, the last year on the ground with the different U.S. foreign policies towards its operations, or repeating the misinformation, or putting constraints on Israel based on misinformation, that's still present. There's definitely a lot of optimism to President Trump's team that he's built. But there's some, even in President Trump's first term, on what he was pushing with trying to reach certain deals. I mean, of course, you got the Abraham Accords. So there's lots of course, positive beliefs on what that would look like. But Israel's still involved in a fight, a day-to-day fight in Gaza, and even with the temporary ceasefire against Hezbollah with Iran. Now you have Syria blowing up, which I don't know if we have time to discuss.
I hope so.
For me, the President Trump thing is interwoven with the United Nations fight. Right? There's a war in the United Nations against Israel. And sometimes you have a General Assembly vote versus these groups that I've been arguing against for a long time, like UNRWA, like human rights groups who believe, like Amnesty International just published, like these are groups that have been co-opted and have an agenda. They're not fact, evidence-based organizations. So there's a war. So yeah, of course, the U.S. policy towards Israel, lots of positive thoughts about that. While they're still fighting a war, still have hostages being held, still have, although there's a lot of movement now reoccupying the north, which was the goal, but you still have this United Nations war against Israel that is not fact-based, clearly biased, and weaponizing, the term genocide or these courts or these votes. That has to be addressed as well. That is, like, I'm looking forward to in a new approach towards that, because that's also getting out of control in the political, really the weaponization of international law and multinational organizations like United Nations, who can convince weaker nations like, yeah, you should really join the bandwagon here and just, do certain things or vote a certain way or say certain. It's just, that's another part of this picture that is part of the conversations on the ground. But yes, many of the people I talk to are very optimistic about the Trump administration's actual, even in the Middle East. It's not just about Israel, it's about the Middle East, right? The Islamic regime in Iran is the cause of all of this. It is, where I want Egypt to have some ownership. I want everybody to acknowledge that all of this is the Islamic regime in Iran's investment in these and radicalization, right? So the radicalization of these groups, children don't get a vote. They get radicalized from birth, and there's somebody pulling the strings of that radicalization, investing billions of dollars into Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis, Shia-backed groups in Iraq that the Trump administration has said very vocally, and you have to see how that turns out. That's a very big part of the agenda, is to deal with the Islamic regime in Iran, both this exporting of terrorism that killed soldiers that you and I know. I lost soldiers in Iraq to Iran-backed group like Kataib, Hezbollah, and other organizations. But they can't have a nuclear weapon, or you really have a changed world. So there's some hopeful aspect that what needs to be done, and it doesn't have to be military force, but a change of policy towards the Islamic regime is a big part of that picture.
Yeah, we see, well, Assad is no longer present and in charge of Syria. Could that change? Sure. There's all kinds of things that can happen, but it does appear that there's an opportunity to have a new Syria, and maybe even, look, you and I both have been alive while Lebanon was a nice place to go visit, and it's a beautiful part of the world if we can just get it to calm down a little bit. And I think both those places that currently is possible. It was not 6 months ago.
No,
they were still going to be problematic places.
A lot of positives, even in Lebanon, with the Lebanese military now actually being involved in operations against Hezbollah. Who would have thought it?
Right. Yeah.
Absolutely. Right. A moment, but it's, there is self-determination, and people believe there isn't. There's self-determination in Lebanon to see what path they take. There is, within Syria, it's as we're talking, it's really scary to see what direction it's going to go. Will it fracture into multiple, basically territories? And you have the Turkish kind of attacking the Kurds at this moment. You have this former Al-Qaeda group now claiming power. It's a wait and see on what that looks like. There's an opportunity it could get better, but it could also get worse, especially for the people in Syria.
Things get worse.
So there will be no shortage of work for the U.S. administration come the changeover. But there's not like everybody's not working right now, because it's some people aren't connected to how fast this is changing. And sometimes they say history changes rapidly, but just in the last year, what has changed in the Middle East and Europe, it's crazy.
There's also that time for curing, right? So you pour the cement, it's wet, and then even 6 years later, in the middle of that thing, it's still wet in there and vulnerable. And so we can have positive things happen, but if our policy is chaotic and we go against, we tend to do this back and forth. If, that can cause further disruption. I can definitely see an effort to leverage Jordan, Egypt, all these regional assets and say, hey, let's do business. Let's create an economy over here that is good for everybody. And I would bet that if you and I could go into Lebanon and just survey the populace, they hate Iran being involved in their day-to-day business and destructing their lives, right? They hate it. I guarantee you we'll find thousands of people within a short amount of time who think that. So there is an urge, but is there that push to allow them to say, yeah, we're not going in that direction anymore? We actually do want to be a resort area and have tourism come flooding in, because that's what they used to be. That's kind of what they still are for a lot of people.
Which is hard to fight. And this is where I agree with you. And population sentiment and want of self-determination is one thing, but sometimes you can't compete against money. Iran was investing billions of dollars. I mean, duffel of bag, let alone the weapons, to Hezbollah. And for the Lebanese government, after the explosion in Beirut and the economy, it's really hard to fight that when you have this terrorist group that's funded by Iran, who's funded by the international community for billions of dollars being flowed to them. It's really hard to compete. But I agree with you. This is a moment where there could be a change. If you keep giving Iran, which I read a problematic report this morning, if you keep giving the Islamic regime in Iran billions of dollars, all you have is a continuation of violence in the Middle East. You stop looking to blame Israel. Like there's sometimes you got to look in the mirror of, it's hard for the Lebanese people to compete against a terror group that's got billions of dollars when their own nation doesn't have billions of dollars.
Right.
And there you see that use of power in Lebanon. We'll see what happens in Syria, in many parts of the Middle East.
Do you have any other specific thoughts on Syria? It's so temporary right now. Everything is just kind of happening. We don't even know if Assad's alive right now. Like I read a story where maybe his plane crashed. Who even knows? It's so crazy right now.
I mean, not that I trust Moscow about as much as I trust a terrorist, but they say he's safe in Moscow. And there was a report of a plane going down, but maybe it wasn't his. You in this group that's especially in Damascus, HTS. I trust them about as much as I trust any other terrorist group. About them changing to moderate. It's a wait and see. It's such a changing environment right now, because you had all these different factions with their own pieces of the pie, but you had the Assad regime's military kind of holding this inner circle that fell. Now you have all those resources going to different groups. My concern is that you would see a greater civil war, not the same type of civil war in Syria. I mean, already the refugee crisis out of Syria, where Europe took millions, and where they are in Lebanon and where they are, it's so wait and see. I don't trust personally the terrorist organization who took power. But we don't get a vote, right? We have to wait and see. Nope. Even bin Laden was rolled out in the 80s as this moderate guy. I'm very concerned. Of course, the butcher of Syria, Assad. Well, this is the whole thing with the numbers, right? I hate people that play the numbers of how many people are dying. There were 83 people a day, civilians dying in Syria for 10 years.
Yeah.
Over 500,000 people died in the Syrian war from 2014 to 2024. There weren't massive global protests against that.
Nope.
So call a spade a spade.
Yeah.
So yes, him being gone is a great thing, but it doesn't mean that things will get better. It's a good thing that he's gone. We don't want, the U.S. administration says, not our fight. We don't want anything to do with this.
Yeah. I mean, I hate to use Haiti as an example, but we've tried to fix Haiti any number of times. And so we're not all the best partner at that kind of thing anyhow. And if all of the people left, I mean, it's the brain drain thing. There's so many different problems. So when we talk about Syria is up for change, it's really in upheaval. It's tumultuous. It's a big, scary ocean of opportunities to get smashed by something. And it's not simple. And if you live there, what are you going to trust? You're going to trust the next leader? You're going to trust tomorrow? No, none of those things are available to you there if you're out there trying to survive. You won't. I don't know if 10 years from now, those folks will be calmed down enough to say, yeah, it's kind of stable now. It's very, very hard. This is just a Pete theory, but instability is the norm, and stability takes a lot of effort to pull that rubber band and then lock it into place somehow, and with the anchor, is it economics, is it regional alliances, who knows, but that rubber band is always trying to get back to instability.
And just the chaos of it. I did the invasion in 2003. Have your thoughts about that? But I saw what anarchy looks like when retribution, different groups coming back for retribution on what was done to them, the rampant looting that actually are like infrastructure and everything. And we're seeing that in Syria right now, and it's really problematic.
Yeah. Even something simple as electricity in Iraq, we never cracked the code on that. And if you gave it to one tribe, scary, because you don't mean to do that, but this town is full of whatever, this tribe or that tribe. The tribe next to them is like, why do they have that? Why don't we have it? They had no ability to tolerate any kind of growth. And so if you got something, and I talked to a lot of locals about this, like, we don't want anything because that causes problems for us, because now we have something and then everybody else is going to come try to take it or have, because there was so much of that chaos within the anarchy. And oh my God, it was, intra tribe, all that. It was hyper complex. And then here we are trying to solve these problems. We don't have any idea about all these downstream problems that are unsolvable a lot of times.
Yeah, you understand those nuances from our own scar tissue of even getting involved. Like, you're doing more damage than by even imposing your power on whatever group that is who has. This is my article in the Wall Street Journal. Like, there is no one solution. There is no one. These fallacies about each nuance down to that level of intimate knowledge of the culture in a different region. In Syria, which you could take this back to Sykes-Picot, like the different factions within that own borders of that nation, it's so complex and so competitive that to believe that you could string it all together under one national framework, which is what the framework we have, right? We have this national framework idea, what we tried in Afghanistan, not like they don't want that. What you're trying to do it, but this is, you and I understand this, and why we study this so strongly is that you don't understand the context. You're doing more damage. You want to, it's almost a Western mindset. Like, I just want to, here's the answer. How did you come up with that answer? That's the solution to this problem.
So this is one of Pete's rules, but the U.S. is a net destabilizer. And the second rule is we refuse to accept the first rule. And so we don't make enough mistakes. You have to make mistakes to do this. Mistakes are examples of having old tunnel doctrine and not knowing it and having to figure it out on the fly and then iterate and improve. You have to make all of those mistakes ahead of time just to figure out how to deal with tunnels. And that's where they're at right now. All of this stuff, look, part of my job was to meet the warlords and talk to them and understand who they are and who's dangerous and who's not. And all of them basically are like, I gathered people. They're my tribe. They're my whatever it is. And my job is to protect them. We don't need or want your unknown protection. We don't want the court that you have. We have a court. It works for us. We're terrified that our sons will go to jail because we don't understand that system. You can explain the system to it all you want. They're like, I don't know. And then, by the way, and this is just me talking about how we look at it. If you look at a court system that we bring in, we'll have a crime lab. If I go to the crime lab and I say, how many cases have you guys helped close? They'd be like, shoulders, none. And so you're going to go back to the sheikh or whoever the warlord is and say, hey, the court system's good. And he can ask me, because these guys know this stuff. And they'll be like, we've never seen any evidence come back from the crime lab that convicted that guy that killed the guy. So we took care of that inside the tribal system. And these are the problems that we haven't even had time to think about with this regional conflict. We have Shia influence over Sunni people who will go kill Jews for them for money. I mean, it is bananas crazy complicated. And as soon as we think we know what we're doing, we don't.
Yep.
Anything else you want to get into before we wrap this up? And thanks, by the way. I know how busy you are. I appreciate you always coming on.
No worries. No, I think that was a lot of coverage, and there's a lot of understanding still needed. And I hope that with this change of administration, just the level of understanding, because you don't get time to figure it out in our, because of we are a part of the conversation. I'm not an isolationist. I don't believe like that's everybody else's problems. No, it's not how geopolitics, not how we achieve superpower status. It is all interwoven. But that level of understanding, which is again the article is what's so needed. And we get into a dogmatic way to think about things, as you and I know, even within the militaries,
Yep.
generals, whomever, institutions, whatever, you have a very dogmatic way of thinking, and that's not understanding of applying your framework on a foreign environment, situation, decision. That learning is living. We have to understand the context better.
Yeah. Just if I can sneak it in, one last thing, you can go real fast on this. Does Donald Trump's stance on getting American hostages back, is that impacting the ground at all out there?
So with trying not to do politics, is that
Right.
what they call the Trump effect absolutely has been seen on the ground. Hamas has said, who went silent for months, who said, like, no deal. I'm not even coming to the table. Qatar said, no deal. I am no longer going to be involved in this. And again, argue your opinions, but facts are Trump was elected, president-elect, and these groups, Qatar has come back to the table and said, I will argue. Hamas has come back. I'm willing to make a deal. Hezbollah came to the table and said, please stop. I'm willing to do a temporary. Absolutely. I believe personal John Spencer opinion with no affiliation. They had a massive influence because they no longer, war is a contest of will. We, the United States, again, my opinion, we're sending enemies around the world signals that just wait out. You can still win. Hamas has gotten that signal, and that involves with the hostages to where right now they believe is the second greatest moment to actually make a deal. But the deal cannot be that Hamas survives the war. That
right.
These fundamental kind of aspects of it, but it clearly had an effect, or they wouldn't have come back to the table.
Yeah. Well, it remains true. The sooner that Hamas stacks arms and walks and goes home, the sooner this whole war ends, and that's it. And they don't want to do that. So here we are continuing to fight. All right, I'm going to roll the credits unless you have anything else to say in closing. No? Good. No. All right, I'll be right back to say goodbye to you. Everybody else, I'll see you later on today. I'm going to have another show. Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you so much.